This is an input for employers around really the endpoint assessment content for the level 6 lab scientist apprenticeship standard. So there's quite a lot of moving parts to an apprenticeship standard, and I would imagine some of you have quite a lot of experience with apprenticeships and maybe some of you not. So if I start from basics, please forgive me if I'm teaching anybody to suck eggs, but if we can start with the basics around what an apprenticeship is and kind of build from there, I think that's probably the best way to go. So we refer to apprenticeships as apprenticeship standards because essentially it is a standard that somebody's measured against. And that standard contains what we call K, S and Bs, so knowledge, skills and behaviours. So your apprentices, your co-workers, the people that are on the apprenticeship scheme are going to be measured against a series of knowledge, skills and behaviours. And that's primarily the job of MMU. The job of the university is to make sure that all of these apprentices are achieving the required knowledge, skills and behaviours of this particular apprenticeship standard. So this is your apprenticeship standard. So this is the standard that the apprentices are enrolled on. This is the level 6 laboratory scientist standard. And there's a section, there's a government website called IFATE, which is the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, where there's over 1,500 different standards. And the lab scientist is one of them. And it doesn't really matter. This really poor infographic should kind of explain a bit what I'm trying to get at, is if you're a firefighter, if you're a welder, if you're an administrator, it doesn't matter. If there's an apprenticeship standard designed for that particular occupational profile, there'll be a preordained set of knowledge, skills and behaviours that particular individual has to demonstrate. And what you can see, and I'll share this slide deck with Lucy at the end, is that there's a hyperlink up here that will take you to that page where that apprenticeship standard is stored. So if you wanted to have a look at the particular knowledge, skills and behaviours assigned to this particular apprenticeship standard, you can follow that link to the government website and you can have a look at those. So in terms of the apprentice journey, so there are a series of milestones or checkpoints that the apprentice will progress through on their journey. So that the first one is initial assessment. So that's the job for MMU. So MMU will perform initial assessments, and that's a very simple diagnostic around literacy and numeracy. Once that's been completed, the apprentice enters into the kind of bulk, the biggest phase of the apprenticeship. And this is the training phase, or it's called the on-program period or the practical period. Because we're in education, there's 3 or 4 names for the same thing, but that's essentially the bulk of the apprenticeship. So if the apprenticeship is say 4 years in length, then it's going to be 3 years and sort of 10 months are probably going to be in this period here. And that's the period where the learners are collecting evidence against those knowledge, skills and behaviours that the standard specifies. Additionally, they are going to be completing their BSc, their degree. So their degree and the knowledge, skills and behaviours can be seen as 2 separate entities, although I'm pretty sure that MMU have mapped degree outcomes to the KSBs. So by completing their degree, by proxy, they're also achieving those knowledge, skills and behaviours. What happens then is once the apprentice has completed their degree, their BSc, and they've evidenced all of those knowledge, skills and behaviours for this particular apprenticeship standard, they're said to be a gateway. And gateway is exactly what it says on the tin. It is essentially a checkpoint, a door that will either open or close depending on the evidence. So and that really the gateway then falls to us. So we are an endpoint assessment organisation, and I've just realised that 10 minutes in, I've not actually introduced myself, so let's do that now. My name is Rob Green, and I represent Marshall Assessment. Now, Marshall Assessment is the endpoint assessment organisation that is responsible for checking that all of your members of staff, all of your co-workers have indeed demonstrated the required knowledge, skills and behaviours. So we're a third party that comes in really towards the end of the apprenticeship and verifies those assessment decisions that MMU have already made on the learners. So we're like that sort of second check. The best analogy that I've probably heard around how apprenticeships work is that Lucy and her team are the driving instructors, and Marshall Assessment is the test centre. So we're the people who just put them through their paces towards the end of the apprenticeship to make sure that they are competent and they are compliant and they are safe scientists. So we really come into the party as far as audit, as far as intervention is concerned at Gateway. So what we'll do is we'll check that the learner has indeed demonstrated all of those knowledge, skills and behaviours, and if we're happy with that, that the gates will open and the learner will be then, or the apprentice will be then moved into the EPA period. Now, the EPA period stands for the endpoint assessment period, and that's a period of time at the end of the apprenticeship. It's a short period. It's normally 8 to 12 weeks, where the learner is preparing for endpoint assessment. And endpoint assessment is just a series, in this case, two assessment hurdles, 2 tests that we perform on that learner. This is Marshall, to make sure that they are competent. Once we've performed our endpoint assessment, then the learner is complete. We will then apply for their apprenticeship completion certificate. So if we break that down into a simpler infographic, really the apprenticeship program has 2 main kind of areas. The first one is the training or the practical period that has to be a minimum of 12 months. It's a minimum of 12 months, but obviously your apprentices are on it for 4 years, so you're well over the minimum time frame. And then we've got the gateway period here, which is the line here. And then if we're happy with all the evidence collected in this period here, the learner enters into EPA period, which is a preparatory stage for endpoint assessment. And then endpoint assessment occurs right at the end here. Okay, so we've kind of covered this, so I'll move through this quite quickly. So that large phase, the on-program or the practical period, the learner has to demonstrate that they've completed their knowledge, skills and behaviours. That will be via what we call a competence log, where all of the knowledge, skills and behaviours are listed, and there'll be evidence against each K, each S and each B. They have to demonstrate that they've got English and maths at grade 4 GCSE or functional skills before they can exit the programme. And of course, they need to have completed their BSc. So that takes us to Gateway. And then at Gateway, we'll check a series of things, but we're primarily interested in the knowledge, skills and behaviours. Have MMU and yourselves worked in partnership to make sure all of those knowledge, skills and behaviours are signed off? Have they got the right level of English and maths? And have they achieved their degree? And then the other thing, and the reason why it's in red is I haven't mentioned it so far, is that there's a project plan. So at that gateway, at the end of the practical period, we need, as an assessment agency, we need to see that there's a project plan, and that project plan is basically submitted to us, and it's basically for us to say, yep, okay, the learner has the correct project, and that project will enable them to progress to endpoint assessment. The worst thing that can happen is if a learner is working on a project that's not relevant or doesn't meet the standard criteria, then they'll fail their apprenticeship. So it's important, before we get into that EPA period, we've had a brief look at the project, and that's the project plan. And very simply, the project plan is a pro forma that we supply to MMU, and therefore they'll supply it to you, that lists all of the criteria for that particular endpoint assessment. And all we need is a brief explanation of how the project plan aims to meet those criteria. And there's 11 criteria. So it's 11 short statements really about how that learner is going to meet the project requirements. And that's a gateway requirement. So the learner can't move into the EPA period without completing the project plan. And if we actually have a look at endpoint assessment, the thing that we get paid to do, which is the driving test right at the end of the learner journey, the driving test or assessment consists of two assessment methods. The first one is the synoptic project report, presentation and questioning. And as an employer, that's the one assessment method that you're most actively involved with. So we'll actually require what we call a technical expert to help us with that assessment element. And the way that assessment element works is that they'll have done a project, normally in the on-program practical period. They'll submit a plan at Gateway, and they'll submit a written report in the EPA period. That written report will go to a Marshall assessor. They'll review it, and then they'll book in. It's almost like a Viva. They'll book in a presentation with the learner, where the learner then presents their report to a Marshall assessor and the technical expert. So, and we'll go through a bit more of the logistics of that as the slides progress, but that's assessment method one. So assessment method one is project based. So it's assessed holistically, actually. It's assessed on the content of their report, their presentation, and how they respond to questions at the presentation questioning stage. So that first assessment hurdle effectively has 3 points of assessment in it. It's graded, distinction, pass or fail. There is no merit grade, so there's distinction, pass or fail grade there. The second assessment hurdle is essentially a professional discussion between the apprentice and the Marshall assessor, and that there is no employer involvement with that second assessment hurdle. The second assessment hurdle would be in a format like this. It would be Microsoft Teams, where the apprentice is at one end of Teams and the Marshall assessor's at the other, and there'll be 8 areas set up for discussion. And those 8 areas are kind of embedded into the knowledge, skills and behaviors, and it'll be a series of questions and responses from the learner, and again that will be graded distinction, pass or fail. So at the end of the apprenticeship, 2 assessment hurdles. One is project based, one is discussion based. You'll be helping with the project based element. So what does the research project look like? So it needs to be an independent investigation. So it needs to be the learner's own work. It is acceptable for the learner to be maybe involved in a shared project, as long as the conclusions and the data presented and the suggestions for further research, etc., are their own. So what they can't do is present somebody else's paper at endpoint assessment. So the research element, to a certain degree, has to be independent. The learner, the apprentice, has to demonstrate autonomy. And I'm sure MMU, Lucy and the team will have worked with you around the project requirements. And just to add an extra level of complexity, just when you thought you were 50% understanding what I'm saying, is that there is a project requirement for the degree that they're doing, but also a project requirement for their endpoint assessment. Now, the project requirement for the degree might be slightly different to the project requirement for the endpoint assessment. So what the learners will be doing is that they'll be taking the project that they've written for their degree, and in that EPA period, they'll be modifying it, changing it to make sure that it meets endpoint assessment requirements. And that's something that Lucy and the team will work with you guys on, to make sure that when endpoint assessment comes, the project is a perfect fit for EPA. What we don't want to do is recreate the wheel and get the learners to do 2 separate work-based large independent projects. So one project will fulfill degree criteria and also the endpoint assessment criteria. So the project itself, what we actually ask for is in the EPA period, we ask for a PDF, what we call primary research journal article. So that will be in the typical format of a primary research journal article. So it'll be title, abstract, introduction, method, materials, etc. That will be 3,000 words, but not including references, and it will be submitted as a PDF, and it will be submitted in that post gateway. So it will be submitted in that EPA period, and as I've mentioned, that report will go to a marshal, independent assessor, but it will also go to the technical expert, which is someone from your place of work. Those two people will review it, and they'll then meet and decide the questions they're going to ask the apprentice at endpoint assessment. So what does the final part of the assessment hurdle 1 look like? Well, once we've had a look at the report and we decide the questions we're going to ask, we ask the learner to produce a 30-minute PowerPoint presentation on that report. The learner can present for between 20 and 30 minutes. So 30 minutes is a maximum, and then there'll be questioning, which will make up about an hour after the learner has presented. And the questions will be around the 11 assessment criteria for this particular assessment hurdle. So anything that the report and the presentation haven't delivered will be achieved through questioning. This is not a controlled conditions assessment. The only element of control is the time. So it's a maximum of 90 minutes. So it's 30 minutes maximum presentation time and 60 minutes maximum questioning time. The only thing that we don't allow the apprentice to bring into them for this particular assessment hurdle is AI. They can't refer to AI, but they can refer to their notes that they've made on program. They can bring their project report in with them. So it's not a memory test. It is an open source test. We just request that they don't bring artificial intelligence in with them. And there will be an employer helping us with that particular assessment hurdle. So if we just go back a slide, there is a panel. So that final assessment hurdle, which is a presentation with questioning, there's a panel, but it's a panel in the smallest sense of the word, in that there is a marshal, independent assessor, and there'll be a technical expert from your place of work. Now, the technical expert really doesn't make any final assessment decisions. The technical expert is in there really to help the marshal independent assessor decode any of your industry specific jargon. Now, the marshal independent assessor will have occupational competence. So, for example, if you're working in, say, a molecular biology environment, we'll send you an independent assessor who is a molecular biologist, but they may not know you might have work-based specific jargon that the technical expert will be there to help decode. So they will be writing notes during the endpoint assessment, but they won't be the technical expert. This is making those final endpoint assessment decisions. But the panel will be somebody from your place of work and a marshal assessor. So what we need from the technical expert is essentially proof that they're competent and proof that they're working at the right academic level, essentially. So we'd need to see a job description, a CV, and proof of their highest qualification. So in order to be a technical expert on this apprenticeship standard, you need to be at or working towards the same level. So you need to be working towards a degree or already have a degree. And we also need some CPD evidence from them to make sure that their professional development is being maintained. So the basic role of the technical expert is to sign off the knowledge, skills, and behaviours that have been developed on programme, and also to help us with that first assessment hurdle. So they'll be signing off that the learner has completed the required knowledge, skills and behaviours, and then they'll also be helping us with assessment hurdle 1. They'll be reviewing the paper and then sitting in with the learner where the learner presents. So very simply, as I've said, that the technical expert will be complementing the Marshall independent assessor in that endpoint assessment. They won't be making assessment decisions. Marshall assessment will train the technical expert. Now, I'm conscious that this isn't technical expert orientation training. This is generic employer kind of information. However, we run a 40 to an hour online, 40 minutes to an hour online import for the technical experts to make sure that they're ready to help us with endpoint assessment. But there's a series of things that we go through with them, and one of them would be not giving the apprentice assistance during endpoint assessment, because although it's not a controlled conditions memory test, what we can't have is the technical expert saying, come on, you know this, it begins with a B, for example. The technical expert can't be leading the apprentice during the assessment. So there's a brief orientation, so the technical expert knows what they're doing and what their roles will be and what they can and can't do during endpoint assessment. So really that first assessment hurdle, there's a lot of moving parts to it. There's a report, there's a presentation, and there's questioning. There's 11 areas that they're being assessed on. And what we do, by the way, is we supply the apprentices with those 11 areas. And we tell them what a pass looks like and what a distinction looks like, and that document's really important. So make sure that your co-workers have got those documents and they know exactly what those 11 areas are before they come to endpoint assessment. And this is a level 6 program, really. So if you think about there's 11 areas and there's roughly 60 minutes worth of questioning, the apprentices should be talking for about 4 minutes on each of those 11 areas when they're asked questions. So it's about the apprentice building their response. So the second assessment hurdle is that professional discussion, and that basically is there's 8 areas, and again there's a support document that we publish that covers those 8 areas. And what those 8 areas look like in terms of a pass, what those 8 areas look like in terms of a distinction. So we basically lay it out for them as to what they need to do to get a pass and what they need to do to get a distinction. And again, those documents are in the public domain. They can bring those documents in with them to the assessment, because this assessment hurdle, just like the first one, isn't a memory test. They can bring things in with them, and what we've actually given the learners is an aid memoir, which basically relates to the particular knowledge, skills and behaviours that we're going to be assessing in assessment hurdle 2, and they can bring that in with them, because although we can say to the learners, look, you can bring your notes in with you, what you don't want the learners to be doing is scrolling through 4 years worth of notes. So this aid memoir that we supply for this assessment hurdle basically says, look, this is what you're going to be assessed on. This is the stuff you need to bring in with you for this particular assessment. So what I would stress is that endpoint assessment isn't like studying for your finals or your organic chemistry or your chemistry A level or your maths A level. It's not a memory test, and actually it's pretty formulaic. So if the apprentices follow our guidance documents and actually prepare in the EPA period, then there's no reason why those learners shouldn't be getting the highest marks available. So this assessment hurdle is a bit longer in duration than the first one. It is 2 hours and 15 minutes. And there are 8 areas. So if we do a bit of rough and ready maths, the learners really should be speaking for about 15 minutes on each of these areas here. So this is really about the learners revising, preparing before endpoint assessment around those 8 areas. So they've got lots to talk about. And really it's about work-based examples. Can you give me work-based examples of when you've had to follow internal or external regulations, for example. So the learners will know the areas they're being assessed on, so they can make notes and bring those notes in with them. But we do expect a full response. What we don't expect for this particular assessment hurdle is a yes or no answer in a professional discussion. So what will happen is the marshal independent assessor will initiate the discussion, and then we expect the apprentice to lead from that point onwards. And what we can do here is where we can prompt. Now, there's a difference between prompting and leading. So when we prompt, what that means is, let's say the learner gives us a really full response for the pass criteria. We are then allowed to give them a prompt so they can also achieve the distinction criteria. However, if we have to prompt for the pass criteria, we can't then prompt for distinction. So it is a discussion, it is a two-way element, but there are certain rules that we have to follow. So again, just a little bit of a kind of summary around the timeline. So if we have a look at this infographic that I showed you at the start, what we need to do before we get to Gateway is nominate a technical expert. So that's somebody from your place of work who can help with that first assessment hurdle. And remember, their two main responsibilities would be to sign off the knowledge, skills and behaviours at Gateway, and actually sit in the panel for assessment hurdle 1 here. So what we tend to do is to provide training and orientation for that individual, either pre-Gateway or just the other side of Gateway. And then what we've got actually at Gateway, what we need as an assessment organisation is that project plan pro forma that we briefly touched on earlier. That project plan is submitted at Gateway, and then the rest of the documents will be managed by us and Lucy and her team, and signed off in some cases by the technical expert. There'll be a bunch of documents that need to be signed, which basically are evidence that the learner has achieved all of the KSBs and the rest of the on-programme requirements. Once we're happy with that evidence, we move into the Gateway acceptance period. And then what happens here in this EPA period is that the learner has 8 weeks, a maximum of 8 weeks in this EPA period to submit their article. And that's that 3,000 word primary research journal article that is submitted in the EPA period. Remember that primary research journal article will then go to a marshal assessor and will then go to a technical expert. They'll review it. They'll decide the questions that are going to be asked. So the questions are already preordained that are going to be asked at endpoint assessment. Once we've received that journal article and a copy's gone to the marshal assessor and the technical expert, we'll confirm EPA dates and times, and that's a body of work that we'll do with Lucy and her team, and then she'll be in touch with you. There is quite a lot of moving parts to endpoint assessment, so we have to find marshal assessor availability, obviously apprentice availability, and technical expert availability. So there's quite a few plates spinning there, but we aim to get those dates sorted really actually in the diary when we've received that project report. But Lucy, I'm right in that we've normally got dates provisionally penciled in before the report's received.
Yeah, absolutely. We start planning them quite early on.
Yeah, great. So actually endpoint assessment itself, so the driving test itself, so that takes place normally a couple of weeks after the learner has submitted that 3,000 word report. So remember that report is reviewed by the marshal assessor and the independent and the technical expert, and they both will ask questions on the day. Normally, both assessment hurdles, so the project and the discussion, are delivered remotely. They're delivered via Microsoft Teams. The order of play is normally the project presentation with questioning first, and then the professional discussion afterwards. In terms of when you find out how the apprentice has gone on, So what happens is after the endpoint assessment has been conducted, then what we can't do, by the way, what I should have mentioned is we can't report the grade to you or the technical expert or the apprentice on the day. So even if the apprentice in our view has done really well on the day, we can't give you any feedback because those endpoint assessment decisions have to go through internal quality assurance, and the grade can either go up or down. So essentially, we've got a double independent marking system where another assessor will look at sections of the assessment decisions that the marshal assessor on the day has made. So we can't release any grades. Even when the apprentice asks us at the end of the day, we can't say anything. What we will do, though, is the grade will be issued normally a maximum of 15 working days after the endpoint assessment. So 15 working days is normally our maximum, and you'll get a confirmation in writing from Marshall. What will happen is, in terms of reporting, that grade will go to Lucy and her team. So we report to the university, and then in turn the university will report to the apprentice. What will happen following that is that the actual certificate will be claimed by the apprenticeship service. That's the actual completion certificate. What you're getting in 15 days is a Marshall pro forma, but the actual IFATE government approved certificate of completion can take 7 to 9 weeks following completion of EPA. And that's normally just to do with seasonal backlogs. So if your learners are completing, let's say August and September time, there's normally quite a big delay because that's a time when lots of certificates are generally being claimed. So just to put what I've been speaking about in a bit of context. So there are various different stages of assessment across the apprenticeship journey. So remember, we talked about initial assessment and then on-program assessment. So any areas in green are the responsibility of MMU, of the university, and that's the completion of the degree, completion of KSBs. And then anything in blue is what we come in at the end and an endpoint assess. So we're looking at the primary research journal article, and we're looking at the project with questioning, and we're also looking at that vocational competence discussion. Remember, it's these two things here that you're going to help us with. These two things make up assessment hurdle 1 here. Really important documents. So there are a series of supporting documents that the learners have access to, and you have access to as well if you want to have a look at them. So we release an overview of the assessment. So basically the overview outlines what we're going to assess the apprentices on and what the day will look like. That's a really important orientation document. We have that project plan template, which is the thing that the learner, the apprentice, has to fill in at Gateway to make sure that their project meets our requirements. And the bit in blue, because this is the most important of the documents that we supply, are the assessment documents for assessment hurdle 1, which lists the 11 areas that the learner is going to be measured on and what a pass looks like and what a distinction looks like. And then assessment hurdle 2, the discussion, the 8 areas where the learner is going to be measured, and again, what a pass looks like and what a distinction looks like. Now, they're not huge documents. They're like 10 to 12 page PDFs that the learner needs to look at and orientate themselves with so they know what they're going to be measured against. And you guys as employers, or whether you're managers or mentors, can also have a look at those documents. The final bit of support documentation that we've talked about already is an aid memoir, really, for the professional discussion for the VCD, and that's the thing that basically streamlines, out of all the work that you've done on program, this is the areas that you're going to be measured on for the professional discussion. So this is what you need to prepare for the professional discussion. Remember, both assessment hurdles are open source. They can bring what they like with them. It's not a memory test. The only thing that's prohibited is artificial intelligence. So this is what the two really important documents look like. They're two PDF documents, and they're called Synoptic Project Guidance and VCD Guidance, respectively. So make sure that your apprentices have got copies of those. So that is a whistle-stop tour of the components of the apprenticeship program. Broken down and in summary, remember there are 2 assessment hurdles. We are interested in working with you as an employer for assessment hurdle 1, and also that same person, that technical expert who helps with assessment hurdle 1, will be signing off the knowledge, skills and behaviours that have been achieved on programme. I'm going to stop there, and I'm now available to take questions if anybody has any. Okay. Lucy, anything from you?
No, I thought that was a really good session, and I think the lack of questions means you must have explained things quite simply. So I did put a few things in the chat as you were discussing, and really that was to reassure employers that those documents, the VCD guidance and the project criteria are distributed to the students well in advance of endpoint assessment. So the 4th years have had those documents for a very long time, and we refer to them in our progress reviews. 3rd years have had a good introduction to the project and what the criteria is. We normally kind of swoop in a bit and go into a bit more detail on that as they approach the summer, and they're in that planning stage of thinking about what project they'll do in the final year. The 4th year reviews are key for those VCD discussion questions, and the skills coaches will coach all final year apprentices through those discussions and kind of prompt them and give them guides on what areas they can discuss and bring from their apprenticeship and linking all the appropriate KSBs. We really value employer support throughout the whole EPA process. So I think it's wonderful that there's been so many of you that have attended today. When we talk about endpoint assessment in reviews, you now know exactly what we mean. And, you know, those guidance documents, I mean, some of the employers this year do have them, but it is great if you can encourage your apprentice to share those documents with you as well. And you can even do practice VCD discussions with the apprentice as well. That's really valuable. So yeah, no, that's all from me. And thank you so much, Rob. That was really, really useful.
So Lucy, we've got we are involved as an endpoint assessment organisation in a pilot around professional recognition, and this is basically what the apprentices can achieve in addition to their apprenticeship when they exit the programme. So if people are okay, there will be 5 to 10 minutes, five minutes tops, just around what this pilot looks like. So if people are interested, then please stay on. It's just 5 minutes really about how we can take that endpoint assessment decision and actually map it to professional recognition. So it's added value for the apprentices. It won't be me doing this. It's my colleague Simon. So we're just going to swap seats. And that's the door being rung there. So I'll swap over. It was good to meet you all.
Thank you.
Rob. Hi,
Thanks,
everyone. Yeah, so sorry to throw this at you. I've been working with, so my name's Simon Duke, so I work alongside Rob. But also one of the things I've been doing recently is a pilot with the Science Council. Because for a long time, looking at the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, you'll go to the apprenticeship standard that your employee is on, and if you look at that, if you have been to those sites and have been to those pages, you'll see all the information about the apprenticeship, and at the bottom of the page you'll see something about links to professional recognition. And the Science Council and various different professional bodies will have looked at the content, the KSBs and everything else, as well as qualifications involved for the standards, and said that they fully align to professional recognition at a particular level, and the lowest level would be registered science technician, and then for degree level, up to degree level, it would be registered scientist, and then moving on obviously to chartered status. So one of the questions I had was, well, where does that come in? How maybe during the training provider's journey with the apprentice and with the employer, how do they just get given it at the end? If you're happy that the apprenticeship delivers this level of competence, knowledge, and skill, what have they actually got to do to get that professional recognition that they have actually earned anyway? And it is what they call an expedited route, which is a piece of paper which has got about 7 or 8 questions on it, which actually isn't particularly easy to do. And it is only expedited because the original version was 15 questions and about 15 pages. So the pilot was a conversation with the Science Council and Marshall Assessment saying, how about you let us use the evidence that we get at endpoint assessment without asking any new questions, without asking for any other hurdles to be put in place, and allow our assessment team to judge the competence against the criteria for professional recognition. And we will write a statement that you can use at the Science Council and also at 2 professional bodies that are being involved in the pilot, which is the Royal Society of Chemistry and the Royal Society of Biology. So we've got to a process now where if employers agree that this is a good thing to do, we can start to process the evidence that they're giving us through this, and actually fast track them through where they won't have to do anything else. So I was just going to move on to the advantages. I suppose the big advantage is it's third-party validation of the training that's happened from the training provider, but also all of that training and development that has been put in place by you, the employer. It helps, or should help, identify people who are working at that standard third-party recognition, and maybe that would help identify mentors and coaches for other apprentices that are coming through. And it highlights your approach at your organisation. So I feel it's a really positive thing. I know in science it's not quite as big as it is in engineering, this professional recognition, because it's not really built in quite as heavily as it is in engineering. All the apprentices will also get their RSI, their registered scientist, post-nominal. So that's something else that they have actually achieved, but they still need to do a little bit just to get that. They'll have their membership either to whichever professional body mostly aligns, and that's for this pilot, which is the RSC or the RSB. They'll get a certificate, obviously, there as well. And there is a bit of a commitment to ongoing CPD, which we'd like to think that we're all doing in science, and also the Science Council Rules of Conduct, which is around research, equality, diversity, and dealing with people. So what I'm going to be doing in the coming weeks before all of these lovely apprentices take their endpoint assessment is I am actually going to talk to them. I have a little opportunity through Lucy to be able to talk to them and see if they'd be interested. Obviously, it's not mandatory, but for the pilot to work, it would be great if we can prove the concept. And the idea, the end game, is that when people go through this really difficult apprenticeship process that's been mapped to the Science Council's professional registration standards, if it works, we can get all EPAOs to do it, and we can offer it to all apprentices that come through. They've got to do is submit a CV, an up-to-date CV. Yes, there is a bit of a charge. For the pilot, the RSC won't be charging anything for their membership, so that will be free for 12 months. So that's good value straight away. The RSB, I think, are charging 20 quid, and there is, I think, a small fee. It might be another £20 that the Science Council are charging for administration and for the printing of the certificates, which will be sent out to the individuals as well. So I wanted to let you know that's it really from me. And the reason that I wanted to just get quickly in front of you is because there is a little bit where on the form, the apprentice needs to state that they have the support from their employer. So you may get apprentices that are interested in getting this professional recognition come to you or some of your colleagues and say, is it okay if I do this? I think that's mainly because there is a cost associated, which the apprentice may not pick up. I mean, they can pay for it themselves, but obviously a lot of organisations do it. But also, I think the Science Council want this to be known by the employers, so they can see and have that visibility. So, okay, that was it. So I just wanted to put that out there so that it doesn't come as a complete shock if apprentices start talking to you about it or raising it at some point. Okay, Lucy, is that okay?
Yeah, that's wonderful. No, thank you, Simon. That's great. Does anybody have any questions? I know we had an opportunity 10 minutes ago. I'll stay on the call in case there is anybody, and I'm sure Simon or Rob will as well, and Diane, if there is
Yeah,
any
Rob's
questions that maybe just want to ask us on a one-to-one basis. But yeah, thank you so much for joining. Wonderful to see so many in attendance. Thank you.